Hi, I'm Saoirse Ronan and I'm talking about my new film called The Outrun on France 24.
Known for Lady Bird and Little Women, in The Outrun, Oscar-nominated actress Saoirse Ronan plays an alcoholic as she returns to her hometown in the Orkney Islands in Scotland to try to overcome her addiction.
Sometimes you can feel a vibration in Orkney. A low rumble. It takes over the whole island and every part of your body. But there is only so much height any wave can sustain before it comes crashing down.
Saoirse Ronan, hello.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could start by describing the film for us.
Sure, so this film's called The Outrun and it has been adapted from Amy Liptrot's memoir about a very painful time in her life. We follow her from her sort of early to mid-20s to her late 20s when she's moved down to London from the Orkney Islands, which is where she grew up. And her relationship with alcohol progressively becomes more and more unhealthy and messy as the years go on. She eventually loses everyone and everything close to her. She goes to rehab to recover from her addiction, and then she unwillingly moves back to Orkney, and that's sort of where the very painful but very healing journey begins.
How did you discover Amy's book and why did you connect with it so strongly?
I discovered her book through Jack Loudon, who also produced the project. He's a very proud Scotsman, and he had gone to the Orkney Islands a few years before and had become aware of her writing, and so he had her book like on his bookshelf for years before he actually picked it up. And when he did, he read it in a couple of days, completely fell in love with the way she wrote and the world that she created. And he handed it to me and he said that this is the next role that you have to play.
I'm sorry.
I can't hear you say that again. I wish you were a completely different person.
The urge to drink can come out of nowhere. You think you're doing well. Suddenly you want nothing more than a drink.
And you said a few years ago you wouldn't have been brave enough to take on this role. Tell us a bit about that.
I think from a personal standpoint, I wasn't ready to tackle this particular topic, which has been a particular illness addiction that has played a huge role in my life. It's really shaped who I am, for better or for worse. It's caused me a lot of pain, as it has for, you know, every second person that you'll meet. Alcohol touches all of us in one way or another. And I finally felt solid enough in my personal life and safe enough to really crack it open and to understand it fully. And I also think that from a professional point of view, I wouldn't have had the confidence a few years ago to bring a character to life who at times is going to be incredibly sort of ugly and mean and cruel and messy. I think I needed more skill, more experience behind me before I could confidently portray someone like that.
And what did you learn about addiction in making it?
I think I learned that just because you recover doesn't mean the journey's over. If anything, that's the beginning. There is no one size fits all. There's a very good chance that someone will relapse after they move into recovery. That's just kind of how it works for a lot of people, and there's no shame in that. I think the really beautiful thing that can come out of it, and what did for Amy and what we tried to explore in the film, is that there is a sort of a light and a joy in finding a new version of yourself that exists without this substance. And anyone I've spoken to who has found themselves in that place is incredibly grateful for where they are now.
How does London compare to Poppy?
A bit more going on, I guess. So how long do you think you'll stay here for? I have a life that I have to get back to.
How's Mum?
She offered to put me into her prayers.
The story is told in a very unique and poetic way. The narrative travels between Rona's city lifestyle and this sort of natural, beautiful place in Scotland. How challenging was it to avoid the cliches of telling an addiction story?
It was challenging because we've been exposed to a certain type of story about addiction for so long. I think that we, from the get-go, were already going to do something quite different because we were following a young woman. So it was always going to be a more unusual, unique take on a very universal story, I think. But when I started to speak to people who are in recovery, a lot of the actors who are in the rehab group, they were very forthcoming with their own experience. And one of the things that I really learned from them was that humour sort of became this tool for them in order to deal with the tragedy that comes with alcoholism or any kind of addiction. They could laugh at themselves more than anybody else could because there's sort of this way of thinking of like, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, you know. So that was something that really rubbed off on me. I think also, you know, there is a lot of emotion there, and I think that's really on the surface when someone is in rehab and when they've just come out. But they've also done so much work on themselves, especially in terms of therapy and in, you know, circles with the rest of the group, that by the time they go out into the real world, they're incredibly lost and vulnerable in a lot of ways. But when it comes to actually knowing themselves, they've done so much more work than a lot of us have.
I'm scared. I miss it. I miss how good it made me feel.
Tell us how you learned to act like such a convincing drunk.
I watched Stephen Graham in The Virtues, and that really was my main reference point. A friend of mine who is in recovery said that out of any portrayal he had seen of someone who was sort of like slipping further and further into that chaos, nobody did it more authentically than Stevie Graham, and I agree. And I also had a piece of advice that Greta Gerwig had given me years before when we had made Lady Bird, which was that when you're drunk, the last thing you want to do is to appear to be drunk. So you want to appear incredibly accurate and precise in how you speak and how you communicate with people.
And you filmed this in one of the UK's most rural and isolated places, the Orkney Islands. Mm-hmm. During the filming, you did some lambing. You went swimming in freezing cold water with some seals. How do you think those experiences and filming in Orkney influenced the film?
They're a part of the makeup of Rona. They influence her state of mind and her state of being so much. I think anything that takes place in the farm was incredibly important for me to immerse myself in early on, because it just gave me a sense of where Rona had come from, you know, what her background was like, what her childhood was like, what was expected of her. The discipline that I think a lot of rural kids need to have, especially when they do work on a farm with their parents. So yeah, it all kind of played its role, really. But this is ultimately, for me, a story about nature and sort of reconnecting with wildlife. So we wanted to honour that as much as possible.
So this is one film that you've got coming out this year. The trailer for Blitz, The Blitz, is out now. What can you tell us about that film, Steve McQueen's new film?
I feel like I shouldn't say too much because I want people to just go in and sort of give themselves over to it. But it's a really incredible story following a young boy called George who, for various reasons, is trying to find his way back to his mother, Rita, who I play. They're from the East End of London, and the war is essentially a backdrop.
My mum sent me away.
She did it to keep you safe.
Your son did not arrive at his destination.
You're responsible for his safety. Why can't you tell me? Where's my boy? This is for all the parents whose children have been evacuated, and for my boy, George.
In true Steve McQueen fashion, we stay on the ground and in the small community of London with the women and the older and younger people who were left behind. And so again, it's a sort of perspective that we've never really looked at before, and it's got so much heart, and it almost kind of feels like a Spielberg movie in how it's been put together. It's an adventure story, but it's one that will connect to a lot of people, I think.
And Saoirse, there seems to be so much Irish talent on our screens at the moment. Cillian Murphy won the Best Actor Oscar this year. There's Barry Keoghan, Paul Mescal, Jessie Buckley, Andrew Scott, all newer actors that we're seeing everywhere. Why do you think there's such a renaissance from the Irish film industry at the moment?
I think we've always been great actors. Like, I don't think that's new. I think probably what's changed is our film industry at home. I think by having filmmakers like Lenny Abramson over the last few years who have created stories for Irish talent that don't revolve around, you know, stories that we've seen before, like the Troubles or the famine or even immigration, things like that. But they're modern and they're fresh. That's kind of given us the win back behind our sails, you know. I also think that Irish people have had to move away from home in order to make a name for themselves. We've had to be able to do accents because otherwise you're just going to be cast as the maid or someone poor because you can only see an Irish person as that for some reason. And I think it's just made us better.
Saoirse, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My body is a continent. My breath pushes the clouds across the sky. And the waves roll into the shore in time with my beating heart.